Mr. Marlowe, you're the nicest neighbor we ever had.
Gotta be the nicest neighbor of a private eye.
Meet Philip Marlowe.
Marlowe?
Marlowe.
Marlowe. Your name Marlowe?
You shouldn't be out of bed, Mr. Marlowe.
I'm not Mr. Marlowe. This is Mr. Marlowe right here.
Well, who are you? You're Philip Marlowe.
Are you crazy? Yeah.
Elliot Gould is Philip Marlowe in Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye.
How come I'm horn? You're supposed to get out of the way. It's okay. You're a nice dog. I didn't do nothing. Mrs. Wade.
Nina Van Pallant is Eileen Wade. She's a very shady lady.
I like your face, too. I think you're someone I can trust.
Your crazy Looney Tune husband could have killed Sylvia Lennox.
Sterling Hayden is her husband, Roger.
Why don't you call your friend the Marlboro man in here?
It's not his business.
He's a very crazy man.
You ever think about suicide, Marlboro? Me? I don't believe in it.
Laugh-In's Henry Gibson is Dr. V.
Dr. V, Dr. V, Dr. V, you must help me, Dr. V. Do you know Dr. V?
He's a shrink who's already been shrunk.
Write the check, Roger.
What check?
Write the check, Roger.
Whoa.
Jim Boughton is Terry Lennox, a small-time punk.
Well, that's you, Marlowe. You'll never learn. You're a born loser.
You can't take my money. I want my money.
Mark Rydell is Marty Augustine, a big-time punk.
It's supposed to be some kind of smart crack.
What do you think, Mabel?
Ow! Oh, wow. That's someone I love, and you I don't even like.
The Long Goodbye has everything a detective movie should have.
What, could you explain that to me?
Action. Suspense.
Listen, Harry, in case you lose me in traffic, this is the address where I'm going. You look great. Harry, I would straighten your tires a bit.
Yeah.
Harry, I'm proud to have you follow me.
Mystery.
What the hell are you doing here? That's not hungry racing swine.
I don't understand. I don't understand it at all.
Beautiful girls. Exotic locations.
Hey, Mrs. Wade!
An exciting chase scene. And a surprise ending. But this isn't it.
Hooray for Hollywood! You may be homemade in your neighborhood. Hooray for Hollywood!
Extract 2, page 5. Regarding the Altmanesque. What is stylistically characteristic about Robert Altman's films? By and large, Altman was what might be termed a naturalistic filmmaker. Turn this around a little bit. No, I'm not. Mostly character-driven and open-ended, Altman's films aspire to be plausible renditions of life's unfolding chaos, while undermining film genre cliches. Hence, storytelling is de-emphasized. The use of multiple plots, loose plots, or virtually no plots at all, subverts conventional Hollywood narrative mechanics in favor of a focus on evolving human behavior and relationships that elude definitive closure. Accordingly, Altman films typically feature natural, i.e. desultory, sometimes actor-improvised, dialogue and richly textured visual content, i.e. widescreen compositions and mobile fluid camera work, e.g. a profusion of long shots, telephoto shots, arcing crane shots, slow tracking shots, zooms, etc., in lieu of more stable, stabilizing deep focus shots, close-ups, and shot reverse shot sequences. Altman films are also famous for being orally dense and realistic, i.e. lots of overlapping, even simultaneous dialogue and ambient sound. Taken together, these formal practices make for a busy, diffuse mise-en-scène that problematizes point of view or disperses it to the periphery, necessitating heightened attention and greater viewer involvement. In terms of character depiction, Altman's films are consistently anti-heroic. They tend to feature deluded, passive, manipulative, or marginalized protagonists. For example, in Altman's women-centered films, The Cold Day in the Park, 1969, Images, 1972, Three Women, 1977, and Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean, 1982, his oppressed and neurotic female protagonists undergo catastrophic personality implosions. In more ironic and less emphatic ways, most Altman films echo some of the salient features of a different genre, American literary naturalism, a deterministic subset of the realism tradition insofar as it depicts the typical American individual as orthodox and lacking in self-awareness, i.e. always already interpellated by and therefore at the ultimate mercy of a venal and cynically manipulative social order. Altman also subverts the bourgeois subject structurally by de-emphasizing its centrality to the cinematic narrative. Quite a number of Altman's films, Nashville 75, Wedding, Health, H, 80, Shortcuts, 1993, Pret-a-Porter, 1984, Gosford Park, 2001, A Prairie Home Companion, 2006, employ large ensemble casts in multi-plotted carnivalesque fashion, rather than the traditional hero protagonist or two around which the standard Hollywood storyline revolves, a formal tendency that carries strong ideological implications. Altman further destabilizes character representation through casting choices. His films usually feature celebrity actors, but often in roles that use their established star personae in ironic or subversive ways. He also puts major stars in minor roles, or has them play themselves in cameo, or turns musicians into actors, i.e. Lyle Lovett, Tom Waits, Huey Lewis, or actors into musicians, e.g. Nashville. Such Brechtian stratagems, combined with the typically decentered and multivalent Altman mise-en-scène to undermine representations of the stable subject while also deflating the dominant American ideology of heroic hyper-individualism, characteristics that militate against easy viewer identification and are therefore guaranteed to baffle viewers accustomed to more familiar fare. Makes sense, doesn't it? Okay. As for Altman's recurrent themes, isolation, loneliness, madness, betrayal, deception, theatricality, deal-making, social climbing, gambling, delusion, failure, death, these rather grim motifs add up to a vision of America as an atomized society of driven, often desperate hustlers, a vision that runs counter to the dominant American dream ideology that simplistically equates individualism with freedom and autonomy. In terms of narrative pedigree, Altman's perennial themes exemplify what Northrop Frye dubbed the archetype of autumn tragedy, but are more thoroughly evident in Frye's archetype of winter irony and satire, which are the forms of dominant Altman oeuvre. Indeed, most of Altman's films are satiric on three broad interlocking levels. 1. They deconstruct the bourgeois myth of the stable self and satirize its vacuity. 2. They dramatize the exploitation and duplicity that marks interpersonal and large social relationships in capitalist patriarchy. 3. They expose and satirize Hollywood genre conventions as absurd cliches emblematic of an infantilizing culture industry. All the devices noted above and the characteristic Altmanesque themes and concerns they enact and support might be best described as existentialist. Contra, dominant pieties that extol the stable bourgeois subject moving confidently through an essentially just and well-ordered world. Altman's movies typically depict fragile and confused human beings, often living in bad faith, passivity, denial, self-deception, but nonetheless condemned to be free. As Sartre puts it, by the boundless protean nature of the real, whose centrifugal force insistently supersedes individual schemes and societal constructs. I knew that already. Still, a formal analysis of the films as finished products is incomplete and sometimes misleading. For Altman, the filmmaking process was as important and gratifying as the finished film itself, perhaps even more so. In a 1977 interview, when publicist Jack Hirschberg asked what really drove him the most, Altman replied, "Well, I don't know. I call it the sandcastle syndrome. I like to play, and I know that the joy of or fun of it is the doing, not in the result. Once it's finished, it's in the can, in a closet somewhere, or the ocean comes and takes it away." While Altman satirized the American hustler mentality, he was himself a compulsive gambler and hustler, always working or scheming to finance new work. What separated him from the object of his derision was that his primary purpose was to make art, not money. Accordingly, Altman assumed the role of a Prospero-like paterfamilias. You know what they are? On set. Paterfamilias on set. Working with a changing but dependable community of production people and players in a mini studio in which the logistics and complexities of his films were worked out among individuals familiar and comfortable with his methods and approach. That's a quote from Kolker, 2011. As McGilligan nicely put it, it was as if his collaborators were a bridge to the self for Altman, as well as to the audience. 1989. In a way, Altman was a throwback to the pre-modern artist, encouraging collaboration, improvisation, and company solidarity. Creative suggestions were welcome, though not always implemented. Attendance at a nightly rushes was strongly encouraged, and socializing was routine. Altman created and orchestrated a series of small societies of creative fellowship, something like latter-day crafts guilds for each of his film projects. Consciously or not, Altman was trying to replicate what German sociologist Ferdinand Tönnies idealized as Gemeinschaft, community, a cohesive congregation marked by informal, cooperative relations based on cultural homogeneity and imbued with a sense of loyalty and moral obligation to the group. It does make sense, doesn't it? But is that the way to say it? Okay. I.e., the kinds of relationships found in hunter-gatherer, horticultural, and other small-scale societies before the development of industrial capitalism. Not surprisingly, Altman's films often satirize Gemeinschafts's polar opposite, Gesellschaft society, i.e. the sort of rationalized, impersonal, large-scale social order that is epitomized by the modern technocratic corporate state and characterized by centralized bureaucracy, wholesale corruption, class stratification, division of labor, political and disenfranchisement, and the lonely and alienated pursuit of individual self-interest. It must be noted, though, that Tony's categories, Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft, are ideals that have never existed in pure form. While Altman sought to make unconventional movies in unconventional ways, he was still beholden to the powers that be for financial backing. That he made as many films as he did for so little money, while so many of them were unprofitable, was a miracle of ingenuity on Altman's part that will never be repeated. To sum up, stylistic and thematic features common to Altman's films and filmmaking process suggest a homologous series of binary oppositions. Helene Kayser identified these points of tension and conflicts of values as community and individualism, mediation and realism, reproduction and production as the primary oppositions in the stories Altman tells. Okay, I better read that again. Makes sense of that. Helene Kayser identified these points of tension and conflicts of values as community and individualism, mediation and realism, reproduction and production as the primary oppositions in the stories Altman tells. I would add others: plot and character, authority and subversion, stasis and fluidity, univocality and multifariousness, commercialism and aestheticism, Gesellschaft and Gemeinschaft. All these related dichotomies ultimately weighed towards the second term. Point to an artist in search of authentic community, but knowing full well that in modern business civilization, the search is likely to find its object only intermittently, if at all. At the same time, Altman's iconoclastic investigation of social structures and mores, combined with his compulsive work habits and restless experimentalism, indicates an outer-directed flight from self-consciousness, a perennial escape from inwardness. Altman admitted as much in an interview with Jack Hirschberg. I must see what he admitted. Right. He said, this is what Altman said: I really try not to look upon myself, because the minute I mean, even this conversation I consider as dangerous. I mean, I really think it's dangerous. I really think that the minute I start to lose my naivety, the minute I lose an honest enthusiasm, the minute I have to say, oh, I wonder what so-and-so is going to think about that when I say it, then I decide not to say it. There's value gone. Then I'm only saying the safe things. And if you start thinking about yourself, or how you look, or about how you're going to appear, and it's impossible. You're limiting your creativity, your ability to do what you want to do. That's why I drink a lot. I like to get stoned or whatever, and just somehow keep my attention away from my own thoughts. Right, that's the end of the quote. Altman's ostensible rationale for avoiding introspection was as dangerous because it stifles the spontaneous creative impulse is plausible enough on its own terms, and certainly a staple axiom of romantic aestheticism, i.e. the anti-self-consciousness theory, that dates back to Thomas Carlyle and the British Romantic poets. At the same time, Altman's flight from self-reflexivity and inwardness might be seen as the instinctive evasion of core feelings that could only foster aesthetic paralysis, probably feelings of self-loathing and self-doubt. For Altman, obsessively making films was his best means of constructing a heroic self-concept. I knew he did it for something. He had his reasons. Keeping a step or two ahead of his demons, maintaining a sense of community, amusing himself and contributing something meaningful to the world. Many artists are similarly motivated. What makes Altman rather unique, especially in the world of cinema, is the relentless intensity he brought to his life's mission, For him, filmmaking wasn't just a profession, it was a deeply personal struggle against his own alienation, the alienation that pervades everyday life in the modern world. Not to say that Altman was a Marxist, he was a liberal Democrat. Nor was he consciously pursuing a sophisticated ideological agenda. Very few filmmakers do, but his films were political in the sense that all films are ineluctably political, that they cannot help but bear some definite relation to the dominant ideology, a relation that is conformist, ambiguous, or oppositional. Altman's films tend towards the latter, i.e. ambiguous or oppositional. Oppositional. Altman's films tend towards the latter two categories. Hence their limited popular appeal, but their enduring fascination for film scholars and critics. In Cinema Ideology Criticism, 1969, a groundbreaking Cahiers du Cinema essay on the ideological analysis of movies, Jean-Luc Cromelli and Paul Narboni assert that film is ideology presenting itself to itself, talking to itself, learning about itself. Once we realize that it is the nature of the system to turn the cinema into an instrument of ideology, we can see that the filmmaker's first task is to show up the cinema's so-called depiction of reality. If he can do so, there is a chance that he will be able to disrupt or possibly even sever the connection between the cinema and its ideological function. 1976. Camolli and Narboni go on to divide all movies into 6 general categories, A to F, that cover in descending order the spectrum from strict conformity to strident opposition to the dominant capitalist ideology. Of particular interest is category E, because it's the one that defines Altman's work. This is it. Films which seem to, at first sight, to belong firmly within the ideology and to be completely under its sway, but which turn out to be so only in an ambiguous manner. For though they start from a non-progressive standpoint, ranging from the frankly reactionary through the conciliatory to the mildly critical, they have been worked upon and work in such a way, in such a real way, that there is a noticeable gap, a dislocation between the starting point and the finished product. The films we are talking about throw up obstacle in the way of ideology, causing it to swerve off course. The cinematic framework lets us see it, but also shows it up and denounces it. Looking at the framework, one can see 2 moments in it, one holding it back within certain limits, one transgressing them. An internal criticism is taking place that cracks the film apart at the seams. If one reads the film obliquely, looking for symptoms, if one looks beyond its apparent formal coherence, one can see that it is riddled with cracks. It is splitting under an internal tension which is simply not there in an ideologically innocuous film, 1976. Okay, that's that bit. Though recognisably Hollywood, Altman's films are filled with the internal tension that Camolli and Narboni describe, self-destructiveness fissures that induce viewers to glimpse the artifice beneath the movie's putative depiction of reality, and perhaps begin to recognise that artifice is ideology and vice versa. A political construct not in the way things are, and as such worthy of interrogation and rethinking. As noted above, Robert Altman was by and large a satirist whose interrelated target areas were conventional ideologies of self, society, and the filmmaking industry. His best films managed to attack all 3 areas with nearly equal efficacy. More often, though, Altman went through phases that concentrated on one of these areas or oscillated between them. Accordingly, this book's structure represents a slight compromise between chronological and thematic arrangements to highlight those shifts in approach and emphasis. Chapter 1 says, Chapter 1, 3 dream films, explorations of female identity, deals with those of Altman's films that deconstruct the myth of the stable bourgeois subject under patriarchy. That Cold Day in the Park, 1969, Images, 1972, and 3 Women, 1977. Chapter 2, Experiments in Genre Revision, surveys the many films that deconstruct the conventions governing various Hollywood film genres. MASH, 70, Brewster McCloud, 70, McCabe, Mrs. Miller, 71, Long Goodbye, 73, Thieves Like Us, 74, California Split, 74, and Buffalo Bill and the Indians, or Sitting Bull's History Lesson, 76. Chapter 3, Large Canvases, focuses on Altman's early multi-protagonist satires on modern American business civilization as dehumanizing Gesell and Shaft. Nashville, 75, A Wedding, 78, Chapter 4. Chapter 78. Chapter 4, Falling from Grace, examines the string of artistic misfires that marked the end of Altman's most fecund filmmaking period. Quintet, 79, A Perfect Couple, 79, Helped H and Popeye, 80. Chapter 5, In the Wilderness, covers Altman's exile from Hollywood in the 1980s, when he directed theatre, dabbled in opera, and filmed a series of stage plays. Come Back to 5 and Dime, Jimmy Dean. Streamers, 83. Secret Honor, 84. Fall for Love, 85, and other works. Chapter 6, Return to Form, covers the projects that returned him to prominence. Tanner, 88, Vincent and Theo, 90, The Player, 92, and Shortcuts, 93. Chapter 7, Final Phase, More Large Canvases and Minor Works, deals with the large ensemble films that dominate the last phase of Altman's career. Pret a Manger, 94, Kansas City, 96, Gosford Park, 2001, The Company, 2003, and A Prairie Home Companion, 2006. As for an overall pattern of Altman's career, one can see that early explorations of individual identity give way to genre deconstructions, which give way in turn to big cast mosaics, then play adaptations, and then another and final raft of big cast mosaics and minor works. The movement is from self to craft, to larger society in ever widening arcs, and with a growing sense of empathy. Altman's last film, A Prairie Home Companion, shows none of the bitterness that permeates earlier large canvas projects. It seems that Robert Altman made peace with his world at the end. Notes. There's some notes. I won't read those. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's 28 minutes. Next, there will be chapter 1. That was the introduction. We've got up to page 11. Okay.